Welcome to 1111. I have Michael here today. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Tony.
Good to see you. Excited to jump into this as you and I have been together for the last 4 or 5 years and excited to get your insights.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So to start off, what does inner work mean for you and how did you get started with inner work?
Yeah, inner work, when I first learned the term, had like this big, mysterious connotation to it for me. Hadn't been exposed to anything like that before. And I just associated a meaning to it that was turned out to be bigger than it needed to be. Like this transformative work that every time you try to do something with inner work, like you feel it and you're different after you do it. And then learning more about it and experiencing it and doing the work over time, I learned, at least for me, it was much more like, say, a workout or any other thing. Sometimes you make progress, sometimes you don't make any progress. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's really incremental. But ultimately, inner work for me means understanding what I'm actually feeling, trying to figure out why, and then accepting it, learning to accept it. And that has been life changing for me. And it's funny to think, at least, that I got into inner work almost by accident. You and I, our common thread is the mastermind that Dominic Quartuccio started. And he came to my company to do a session on just kind of breaking you out of your routine and your rhythm. And my boss, who engaged Dominic, was going to meet Dominic for dinner and talk about the session and all the rest. And at the last minute, my boss couldn't do it and asked me if I would do it. And so Dominic and I had dinner the night before. We just hit it off and we talked about not only the following day's session, but so many other things. And we developed a bond and a rapport. And we kept in touch after the corporate session. And he called me, I don't know, 6 months later and said he was running a retreat about inner work for men at this wilderness place in Black Hawk, Colorado, and would I be interested in going? And my first thought was, it doesn't feel like that's for me. But then I thought, I trust this guy. I'm interested in finding out what it's all about. And I said yes. And that was my first foray into inner work. And that weekend, if I had done nothing else, would have been so impactful and changed my life. But the few years that I've spent since that point doing inner work have really made a difference. So that's how I wound up there almost by accident.
Hmm, that's awesome. What would you say once you got into the inner work was a component that made you stay committed to it?
Um, I'd say the thing that made me stay most committed is just actually seeing the impact for myself in other men, but more importantly, having the people in my life, whether that's my family, my friends, people who don't even know me that well, like say, you're different. I don't know what it is. I don't know why, how, but like I sense a difference, a different piece in you or a calmness. And you know me long enough, Tony, to know I'm a pretty even keel, calm guy to begin with.
Mhm.
So for people to feel that and call it out felt good. So it just felt like I'm becoming a different and better person, and I want to keep going and explore this more and more.
Mhm.
And ultimately, part of my role with Dominic was to help other men who were interested in this explore, is this the right avenue for them? What does inner work mean? And that type of thing. And one of the things I remember telling almost every man who I spoke to is like how amazed I was that when you do the work and you're in an environment where you can build trust, how quickly men share some of the things that they may have never shared, even with the people that they would have thought are closest to them and that they have complete faith and trust and confidence. Like those things come out, and some of them are, at least on the surface, small things, and others are quite impactful, emotional experiences that they've been carrying that burden. And as soon as they learn that it's one, safe, and two, that they're not the only one dealing with these types of things, and the openness comes out, like that is the most powerful thing I've ever experienced.
Yeah. I've had the privilege to experience not only both of ours, but just the whole group. And those moments are so
Yeah.
powerful.
And just to witness it in other men. So sometimes, in a group of 15 or 20 men, sometimes there's a good portion of the men who are just witness to somebody going through that experience with the facilitators. Just being a part of it and seeing it, and most importantly, feeling it, can have just as dramatic of an impact as if you're going through it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear men say the words, like, I've never told anyone else this before, and here it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, my theory is, in a room of either complete strangers or relative strangers that you build the bond with over time, like, there are no expectations of you, meaning you can come in and be who you want to be. You can be free emotionally, you can be free with your words, your thoughts, certainly respectful of the other men, and all that is absolutely important. But like, you don't have to play the role of the dad who's always got it all together, or the son who is always there for the parent, or whatever other multiple roles you're boxed into in your life. Like, none of that exists in this type of inner work setting. You can
Mm-hmm.
just be who you are and want to and aspire to be.
Yeah. When people have those moments where they really open up and really feel into the effects of that, it hits them. And that's where sometimes I see this commitment start to come is like, I want to continue doing that because it was so powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you mentioned earlier that you were helping Dominic and others to identify people who are ready for this to come into a mastermind. And during that process, did you ever find anyone that just isn't ready for that? I'm curious if the people that benefit from this the most, do you feel like they really need to be in a state of curiosity versus, this almost forcefulness of trying to get into inner work?
I think a part of that, and this is something that revealed itself over dozens of conversations with men, is there's a difference between doing inner work versus doing therapy or counseling or something else. The inner work is not a substitute for the other. And what I found is there are men with deep emotional scars, needs, voids, who think inner work might be the path, who probably need some type of help from a professional who knows how to guide somebody through that journey.
Mm-hmm.
And just so I think, come back to your question, the answer is yes. Part of is people who just need to get their foundation, I would say, a little bit more squared up before they would try inner work. And then there's also a cohort of men who are just not ready. Like, they tell themselves they're ready, and they want results, but they're not, when you get really down to it, they're not willing to do the work.
Sure.
And part of the work, the baseline of the work, is showing up, whether it's twice a week, once a week, whatever the cadence is for the group, being there and being present, because that is an element of what builds the trust. And the trust is what enables the breakthroughs, the discussion, the saying you finally discover your feeling, and those types of things. So there's some men who are just not quite ready to make that commitment. And some, I would say, absolutely legitimate, but some men, when they hear what it's all about and what it takes, there's a guard, a shield that goes up, and they can justify it by, like, I'm too busy, my children, my family, my work, whatever it is. And I could just sense at times, like, hey, this is touching an area that feels sensitive. My first reaction is to hit eject and flee. So there's some men who fall into that cohort as well.
Hmm. Is there any advice you would give to people that, may come into those situations where it's just not my time, but they continue to use that excuse time over time? Is there any certain
Yeah.
reflective questions you would give to anybody to say, this is the right time?
Um, I guess my gut to that, Tony, is a lot of people, it is the right time. They need it. They're just not ready to do it, because they tell themselves, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with facing and understanding my emotions and accepting my emotions. And the words I've used to many of those men is, you're already dealing with it. You're dealing with it by burying it. You're dealing with it by shielding yourself from the downside of, hey, I won't feel this pain or emotion. But they don't understand they may be also capping the upside of the joy and the satisfaction they feel. So you are already dealing with it. You're just dealing with it in a way that probably doesn't give you a big opportunity for it to get better. And many men let it percolate and um, don't come to inner work until there's something that forces it, an emotional breakdown, a deterioration of a marriage or a key relationship or whatever it might be. And then they're like, now I've hit rock bottom and I have to do something. But it's like waiting until you have a heart attack to focus on your heart health. You know you need to do it, but sometimes you just can't do it until you have no choice.
Let's say you want to bring your friends into this. Would you shy away from that and go to a group that was all strangers to have the most effect?
I would. So not to say that it couldn't work with a group of friends or a group that included friends, but I feel like it gets back to what I said a little bit earlier is like in your friend group, like people have a perception of you, whether it's the real you, whether it's a side of you that you only show in that certain friend group or whatever. And let's say to get the most out of inner work, you want to be free from that. You won't, if you're in a friend group where it's focused around sports or any other hobby or activity, like you have to kind of break something in terms of the dynamic with your friend or friends to go in a different place. And that extra work sometimes is really hard to do because as much as you feel like you may know that person, that friend, like, do you really know you can trust them with your emotions, with getting messy as you explore different things that you might not have understood about yourself? So I'd encourage men not only to find a group that you can go into that with a clean slate, but also to do the homework to find groups that are reputable, who have a track record. There are many people out there like who hang a shingle and say, I'm going to lead men's work, who just don't have the experience, the skill, the depth to do it. So I'd say beware about understanding who you're getting involved in any of this work with. Um, some people have a big price tag to this. Like, what will you get for your money in terms of not only just repetition of meetings, but the depth and the quality of the relationships? I'd say ask the questions about how will you build trust and connection among the group? How will you handle violations of that trust? What will be the norms and protocols that you'll put in place to create the safe environment? Those are some questions that I would expect to have really good answers from somebody who knows this work and is committed to doing it and leading it. And then ultimately, trust your instinct. If this is new work to you, you go on things you've already dealt with. I mean, building friendships or connections is something most of us have done, certainly at one degree or another. Like, trust your instinct on a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, jumping back into your experience, and to reflect upon it, what do you think are one or two things that you've applied to your life to improve your well-being and really look
Yeah.
at the success of this inner work upon yourself?
So two things come to mind. One goes back to what I said at the very beginning in terms of understanding your feelings and then ultimately learning or doing your best to try to understand why, but also most importantly to accept it. When I learned those elements, the acceptance of my emotions, I realized how often in my life at that time and going back through my history, like how often I was wrestling and fighting my emotions, whether that's guilt, anger, jealousy, any of those things. Like, I didn't understand truly what I was feeling. And many of those things manifested in me as anger, lashing out, putting up boundaries, isolating, like so many different ways, but a lot of the root causes were the same. And none of those things necessarily feel good when you're experiencing them. So I spent so much of my time and energy like trying not to feel what I was actually feeling. And then what I learned through the inner work is to say, no, it's okay. This is what I'm feeling. I understand it. And just accepting that this is the way I feel. And then saying, given how I feel, now let me make a conscious choice about how I want to behave, how I want to react. And before there was like no gap between that. I felt it, I thought it, or I acted or reacted mostly. And so the biggest thing is learn to accept, and that awareness has been life-changing for me. I feel like I've become good at enough at it that I can help other people through that same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm really angry about this. I can ask them questions and they say, you know what, I'm actually really not angry. It's actually this other emotion. And help people say, yeah, I feel this way. That's okay to have your feelings. Mm-hmm. And now you can decide what do you want to do in terms of your actions and behavior. Yeah. So that's a big one for me. A second big one was to learn that helping people should start with just being there and listening and asking questions versus solving it for them. So one of the biggest things that I took out of the men's work is my job in most of my relationships is not to fix it for somebody. And once I understood that and learned tactically how to do it and what that felt like, not only was it liberating for the people who didn't necessarily want my help to begin with, but it was liberating for me because I didn't absorb, or I learned to absorb less or not at all the burden of now, Tony, you talked to me about this problem. Now I have to fix it for you, or I have to worry, or I have to take on a piece of your burden. Like I was being crushed under that weight at work, in my family, and it was a trap of my own doing. And when I understood that, and when I started to behave differently, I was actually more helpful to people by just listening and asking them questions and helping them go through their own process. And I just felt lighter because I didn't absorb all the weight of that for people who weren't actually, ironically, asking me to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. So those are two really big, powerful things, and certainly many other things, but those two have been the biggest life-changing elements of the inner work for me.
That's huge. In going into your asking questions versus fixing, how did you get better at it? Because my personal experience is just almost biting my tongue when I know I'm going to start going into the fixed mode versus I need to listen mode.
Yeah.
When I'm listening, there is this awkwardness of silence that we have to deal with sometimes.
Sure.
And how do you hold that space? And do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, the silence is really hard because in the absence of conversation, sometimes you just want to fill that void. But part of it has been learning to just let it sit for a second. And sometimes 5 seconds feels like 5 minutes, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. But the first thing that has been helpful is to ask the question, is there anything else, or is there anything more? Because what I learned through practice and witnessing it is sometimes venting is what's like feels like it's most relevant or most pressing. But by asking the question, is there anything else? Like it just kept going deeper and deeper. And then the person often has a tendency to say, yeah, and this. And then they just may calm down a little bit more, but then you can get a better sense into the root of what might really be upsetting the person. And the other piece is like, tell me what is it that you're feeling and why do you feel that way? Because that's a really powerful question in terms of listening and helping somebody through it. But when somebody has to answer the question, many instances I've observed like they haven't really even thought about it. Yeah. Right. They're so focused on the details and the logistics of the situation. They haven't thought about like, what am I actually feeling and why? Pausing and asking somebody that question like helps them start to figure it out a little bit. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes you just needs to get to the end of it without a resolution and then let the person do some of their own work and ruminate on it or iterate and maybe have a second conversation, or depends on obviously on the circumstances. But those are a couple specific questions and tactics that are helpful for me.
Nice. Those are two things to think about when you get into that space of silence and what to do.
Yeah.
And to actually leverage that, is there anything else that you would want to bring up on this podcast call right now to share?
I'd say something, steal a quote from Dominic. Doing inner work on your own is slow and incomplete. Doing inner work with other people is something that really can raise the impact dramatically, because we're blind to some of the things that we're putting out there in terms of vibes, emotions, and sometimes it's so evident to somebody else, even if we don't think or want to admit that it is. Here, an example might be, you're telling me about a wonderful event in your life and why you should feel good about it, and there's not a trace of a smile on your face. You won't be aware of that as you're trying to justify. If you tell me something, I notice you're not smiling, I'd say, Tony, you're telling me how happy you are. I'm not feeling that from you. What I'm feeling is tension or anxiousness or whatever. Is there anything to that? Doing inner work in a community context. If you're going to do inner work, that should be at least a critical element of the inner work, is doing it in a community. Again, think about what I said earlier, in an organization or group where you trust the leadership, they're setting the right environment for it, and it feels good for you.
Yeah, there's so much about the community observation that you learn through others' experience as they're coming through those aha moments, because you can be able to relate to that. So I
Yeah.
totally agree.
And we all, nobody ever disputes me when I say the quote, like, if you change nothing, nothing changes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing how often in our lives we're hoping for a different result without actually making any change. And I'd say ultimately ask yourself the question, if you're thinking about inner work, like what do I have to lose? And obviously the answer is maybe some of your time, some money, but put that on this one side of the scale, and the other side of the scale is, what is it that I have to gain? And depending upon your circumstance, your situation, like sometimes that's a no-brainer decision in terms of the upside of what you have to gain.
Mm-hmm. And if you go back, reflect on your 22, 23-year-old self, is there any advice you would give that 22, 23-year-old Michael?
The first thing I'd say to my younger self is, it's okay. All these things that feel so heavy and important, like, they're really not going to ultimately matter. So it's okay. And a big part of that is to be like, it's okay to feel the things that you feel. It's okay. And I would put an arm around myself and just say, like, here's maybe another way. Here's another path, another way to think about things. If I could go back and do that, I certainly would have had a different trajectory to my life. As happy as I am in life and all the blessings that are part of it, like, that would have made a difference.
Really nice, Michael. Well, thanks for your time
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Great.
I appreciate the opportunity, Tony, and I'm excited about your project and to see the finished result.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Michael.
All right, Tony, bye.